The wind bit through the empty streets, sharp and merciless. An elderly woman shuffled slowly, her hands clutching a small paper bag. Inside, just a piece of bread and a container of thin soup. It was all she had managed to afford that day. Her coat was worn, her shoes barely holding together, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. She lowered herself onto a park bench, sighing in relief as the weight of her tired legs gave way. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the bread. Her stomach growled, but before she could take a bite, a shadow lingered in front of her. A boy, no older than 15. His cheeks hollow, his hands trembling from the cold. His eyes, hungry, pleading, stared at the food in her lap. The woman froze. This was her only meal. Tomorrow held nothing certain. Yet her heart, bigger than her hunger, whispered louder than her stomach. Slowly, she broke the bread in half and placed the piece in his shaking hands. As the boy devoured it, she smiled faintly, unaware. She thought she lost her only meal that night, but destiny had prepared something far greater. Her name was Margaret, once a loving wife, once a proud mother. But time had stripped her of almost everything. Her husband long gone, her children scattered, and her days now stretched thin on a pension barely enough to survive. The neighbors passed her without a glance, whispering that she was just another old woman, too invisible to matter. The boy, on the other hand, was nameless to the world. His coat was torn, his shoes full of holes, but his manners were gentle. Even as he ate the bread with desperate hunger, he paused to whisper, "Thank you, ma'am." His voice was soft, carrying more gratitude than most gave her in years. As the night deepened, they sat side by side on that cold bench, two strangers bound by need. She spoke quietly of her loneliness, how silence echoed in her small apartment more than hunger ever could. He admitted he hadn't eaten properly in days, his stomach a constant ache. Margaret smiled faintly, eyes glistening in the lamplight. "Kindness," she said, pressing the last piece of bread into his hands, "is the only wealth I have left." The boy looked at her, his lips trembling as though he had just received far more than food. By the time Margaret looked up from her thoughts, the boy was gone. He had slipped away into the shadows, leaving her with an empty lap and a strange ache in her chest. She searched the street with tired eyes, hoping for a goodbye. But there was nothing, just the biting cold and the hollow growl of her own stomach. The next morning, hunger pushed her to the small grocery store at the corner. She clutched the few coins she had left, rehearsing in her mind how she would stretch them. Bread, maybe milk if it was on sale. But when the clerk rang up the items, the total flashed brighter than her coins could cover. "You're short," the clerk said flatly, loud enough for the line behind her to hear. Margaret's hands shook as she counted again, cheeks burning. A woman behind her whispered, "Can't even afford bread. Why come here at all?" The clerk sighed, pulled the loaf away, and set it aside. Margaret left with only a carton of milk, her pride shredded more than her stomach was empty. Back at her apartment, her landlord stood waiting by the door. His face was cold, his tone colder. "Rent's overdue again. You've got a week or you're out." No excuses this time. Margaret lowered her eyes, murmuring apologies, but he was already turning away. As she stepped inside, voices drifted from the stairwell, neighbors snickering. There goes beggar grandma again, always hanging on by a thread. She sat on her thin mattress, the walls pressing in, the silence heavier than ever. For giving away her only meal, she now sat hungrier, humiliated, and one step closer to losing the roof over her head. It seemed the world had decided to punish her for kindness. The days that followed bled into one another, each colder and quieter than the last. Margaret's cupboard was nearly empty. She stretched what little she had, sipping watered-down soup and rationing crumbs of bread, her body growing weaker. Some mornings she wondered if she had the strength to even rise from bed. And then it began. The first time she opened her door and found a small paper bag waiting on the step. Inside, a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, eyes darting around the hallway. No one in sight, no note, no explanation. She asked the neighbor upstairs, but he shook his head. The clerk at the store denied it too. "Maybe someone feels sorry for you," a woman muttered with a shrug, but no one claimed it. The next evening, it happened again. Another bag. Fresh bread, a little fruit, even cheese. Margaret clutched it to her chest, torn between gratitude and unease. Who would do this for her? And why? A week passed, and every day the mysterious food arrived. Margaret prayed quietly, whispering thanks into the silence, though a part of her couldn't shake the fear. Was this kindness or a test? Then, one bitter night, headlights cut through the darkness outside her building. A sleek black car rolled to a stop at the curb. Margaret froze by her window, heart pounding. Such cars never came to streets like hers. The door opened and a tall man in a suit stepped out. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he looked directly at her building. Moments later, a knock thundered on her door. Margaret's knees buckled as she opened it to find the man standing there, his face serious but calm. "Are you Mrs. Margaret Hayes?" he asked, his voice low, deliberate. Her throat went dry. She nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. Eviction officers, debt collectors, maybe worse. "Yes," she whispered, trembling. "Good," the man replied, his eyes softening. "My employer has been waiting to meet you." Margaret's breath caught in her chest as the man in the suit stepped inside, his presence filling the dim little apartment. He glanced around at the cracked wallpaper, the thin mattress in the corner, the nearly empty shelves. His eyes softened, but his tone remained formal. "My name is Daniel," he said gently. "I work for Mr. Alexander Grant." Margaret frowned. The name meant nothing to her, though the way Daniel spoke, it carried weight. "Mr. Grant," Daniel continued, "is one of the country's leading philanthropists, a billionaire, yes, but more importantly, a man searching for honesty in a dishonest world. His son ran away from home some weeks ago, tired of being surrounded by fake smiles and shallow kindness. He wanted to know if true goodness still existed among people." Margaret's heart thudded. Her wrinkled hands gripped the shawl tighter. Daniel leaned closer. "That boy you met in the park, the one you shared your meal with, was his son." Her lips parted, but no sound came. "He returned to his father," Daniel went on, "and told him about you. He said, if one poor old lady with nothing of her own can break her last bread for me, then there must still be good in this world." Margaret's eyes blurred with tears. Her act, so small in her mind, had reached further than she could have ever imagined. Daniel's voice grew tender. "Your kindness touched him, and it touched his father even more. Mr. Grant has been searching for you, Margaret. He wants to thank you in person." At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Margaret turned her head, and there, framed in the doorway, stood a tall man with silver hair and piercing eyes. His suit was immaculate, yet his expression carried humility. Behind him, the boy, cleaned up, dressed, but unmistakably the same child she had fed, stood smiling, his eyes brimming with warmth. The billionaire himself stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "you gave my son hope and reminded me what real humanity looks like. Tonight, I came not as a rich man, but as a father who owes you everything." Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had thought she lost her only meal that night, but she had gained something far greater than she could ever dream. Margaret could hardly believe her ears as Mr. Grant spoke. He assured her that from this day forward, she would never go hungry again. A comfortable home had already been prepared, with warmth in every room. Her medical care would be covered, her dignity restored. No more scraping coins together, no more humiliation at grocery counters. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Those who once whispered "beggar grandma" now stood in stunned silence as a sleek car carried her away. Their eyes followed with shame, realizing the woman they mocked for her poverty had been richer in heart than all of them combined. Inside the car, Margaret turned to the boy. Clean, well-fed, his eyes shone with gratitude. Tears welled in hers as she reached out, pulling him into her frail arms. "Ito, you gave me more than I gave you," she whispered, her voice trembling. The boy shook his head, but his smile said everything. For Margaret, it was never about bread, never about reward. But in her single act of compassion, she had gained a family, respect, and a place where loneliness no longer lived. That night, she stepped into her new home not as a forgotten old woman, but as proof that kindness can rewrite a destiny. Kindness never goes unseen. Even the smallest sacrifice, a piece of bread, a moment of compassion, can ripple into miracles far greater than we imagine. The world may measure wealth in coins, but true richness lies in a heart willing to give, even when it has little. Margaret's neighbors once judged her by her empty purse, but it was her full heart that changed everything. She proved that dignity, love, and humanity belong to those who choose compassion over comfort. Wealth fades, but humanity lasts forever. That night, as she stepped into her warm new home, Margaret paused at the door. She smiled, not for the walls or the furniture, but for the memory of one simple meal shared on a cold bench. It was a meal that changed not just her life, but the life of a boy who had been searching for hope. And in that moment, Margaret knew. Her kindness had not only fed a hungry child, it had fed a starving world with proof that goodness still exists,